the bigger commercial director thing where I was sitting in one of the big high back chairs and there's an AD with a megaphone and I didn't know any of the crew. There's dozens and dozens of crew people that I'd never met and I'll never see again. And it felt so alien to me. And I was just continually yearning how to go back.
I had Henry Busby on the show today, and I straight up loved talking to this guy. He was vulnerable, he gave very thoughtful answers, and I could tell that he really cared. Henry's background, he was a very successful, and still is a very successful commercial filmmaker whose career originally started off in New York, where he worked with a lot of bigger brands and achieved a lot of accolades. He worked with Dove, he worked with Dix, with Buy, whole 9 yards. And then this guy kind of had to take a step back. It was this like his career, although it was flourishing, it took a lot out of his mental health, his physical health, and emotional health. Kind of switched things up and learned how to deprogram himself and be more in tune with his own vision. He recently moved to Alabama and he's now mixing both local and commercial filmmaking. Guys, I've got an episode that I'm sure you will love. Henry Busby, let's go. Can you talk a little bit more about the differences between local filmmaking versus, like larger scale urban filmmaking?
And before I do that, I just want to say that's one of the reasons I was excited to come on because in some ways I feel like I've been off grid in a lot of ways since leaving New York or even maybe a couple of years before that. So this life that I'm carving out now is something that I'm really passionate in talking about and something that, um, I still get emails from different creatives and actually an old contact from New York emailed me, just a few days ago and he started as somebody that was, more above me in the food chain and he ran a production company and he emailed me and he was just like, What's up, man? Work is he was just like, I'm having a real tough time with work here." And that's a story that I hear from a lot of my friends that are still in the larger markets or commercial industry in New York or LA. So as far as like the difference in working locally and working nationally or in the bigger markets, I still do both, and I'm very passionate about doing both. They require really different skill sets, and I've had to grow a tremendous amount in the last couple of years to figure out how to do both of those. I would say in the first year that I was back in Alabama, I had a baby on the way. We had just bought a house. I didn't know, I had family back in the community, but I hadn't been here for 10 years, so I was starting over. And that first year, I really just focused on like, okay, I got to get going with some local jobs. Like, I'm not above anything. It was like the best um, kind of character reset for me in some ways of like, hey, forget who people think you are, forget what you've done, forget what brands you think you've worked with that are cool. You've got to make a living. There's a baby coming down the pike and you need to get practical about what's gonna work, and so I think I started growing a lot of skills that would have been very valuable to me in my previous career in New York, and they've filtered back into that, but I think a lot of what I really got serious about is just like, um, I gotta I have a warm wrap light on my desktop over here, so, um, I had to get really serious about, like, what's working and really having those conversations with a client about what are you trying to achieve? Like, I I think I've said this many times, but, like, when I was younger, 24, 25, and, was more of a hot shot, um, for me, I almost just totally disregarded whether it was the agency or the client or the brief. I was just like, "I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna do the nay nay. I'm gonna do my moves and do whatever I want, and we'll sort it out later." And some really special and I think unique brand films kind of came from that mentality, but it wasn't sustainable because I wasn't really interested or invested or oriented around how are we working together on this? Am I understanding your goals? and that's what working locally has forced me to do, and I love that as you mentioned, like, the relationships are so much more in person and direct. Like, in New York, once COVID hit, most of that culture, the in-person meeting culture, kind of died off, and I asked my friends that are still there about this, like, going to agency meetings, even just general interest meetings, like, you email, um, somebody at an agency and say, "Hey, I would love to just come by for a coffee and, like, show you some of my work in person and chat," and you'd have a half-hour meeting. That used to be such a big part of that world, and I think more and more you don't have those meetings or they've been moved to Zoom, and so a lot of times that relationship is just starting out the first time you get on that agency call to talk about a brief, and some people, I think, really excel at sort of turning on the magic and just being like, "Ba here I am, like, I'm gonna charm you and dazzle you and kind of wow you with my people skills here." But for me, knowing someone really comes first, and then it's easier to understand, like, what we're trying to do. I think for me, it's about being myself first. So, it's funny, I'm editing a job right now for the ad council that's about, like, mental health, and, sometimes these little earworms from, like, interviews that I'm doing on a job, they get stuck in my head, and I kind of absorb them, and this guy was talking about, um the question was about, how do you help friends take care of their mental health, and he was basically just saying, like, well, I have to offer that vulnerability first. I have to, like, lead with authenticity and just do my best to show up as I am and sort of create that tone or set that, space for them to be who they are, and, some people take that invitation and run with it, some people don't, but that's, I think, all that I really can do.
Yeah, and it seems well, I can understand why it works because by breaking down your walls, you're making people more likely to do the same. You're making them feel more connected to you on a deeper personal level. And Henry, like, when we were talking before I clicked on record, like you're right off the bat, you're super authentic with me. You were real, and I felt that, and I wanted to recognize that, and thank you for that. It adds to how much I engage as well, and probably working with clients. Is this a skill? Like, how have you worked on the skill over time?
Well, I can apply that, to how it comes into play for me as a director or filmmaker. Um, I would say most of the work I do at this point, I do a lot of different kinds of work, and we may go into that later. Like, whereas as a director in New York, you're going to be very specialized. I am in many ways a generalist now, but um, I think the common theme, if there is one in my work, is almost all of it is still interview based or people based. And so I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of in-person interviews with people I've never met before. Maybe I've had a chance to research them. Maybe I'm just literally showing up and starting an interview. And that's kind of a technique on its own. Is sometimes I go in with no preconceptions about who that person's going to be, but add into that if it's a larger job or even a medium job, you're gonna be surrounded by camera operators and camera assistants and a gaff. There's people, and then there's agency people watching all of your interaction on a screen. And so, just recently with this job that I referenced a minute ago for the ad council, I was doing, interviews about mental health with, a reality TV star. And in the first 5 minutes of the interview, the agency, or when I went to check in with them, they're like, "Hey, he seems like a little nervous." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, no shit, he's nervous." Like, there's 3 cameras around, there's all this stuff. He's been in makeup. I mean, can you imagine trying to have an authentic conversation with somebody after you've sat in a makeup chair for an hour?
And you're also talking about mental health
Right, right.
on top of that.
And so, I said, "Let me go back in and just try something different with him." And this is something I've done a few times, is I just flipped the interview. I said, like, "Hey, I don't know you yet. I know this is a strange context to be having a conversation with somebody, and let's make it more of a conversation rather than an interview. If you wanna ask me any questions, feel free to throw any of these back at me. So, um, he asked me a few questions about, mental health or kind of subjects around that, and, I think this is just who I am, but as best as I could, I just tried to, uh, be completely open with him and, went into aspects of my life that, may be very private, but I'm willing to share those in front of everyone, and then in turn, he starts to feel more open, and we get the ball rolling, and then we have a good conversation.
The flipping the script really sticks with me. I haven't heard of I don't even want to say tactic, but I haven't heard of that. I haven't ever heard of anyone using that, and I can get how it makes someone calm down a little bit more and um, yeah, do better at the interview.
Yeah, and there's different approaches to it, and I think what you said about, like, it's not a tactic per se, it's kind of an anti-tactic in the sense to me that it just seems like common sense. Like, I remember when I was in college, I was taking a documentary course, and we were watching a lot of Errol Morris films. I'm not sure if are you familiar with him? Okay, he very I mean, he's a world-class interviewer. He's gotten, such interesting insights out of people that you would never you'd say, "How," "Why on earth did they share that on camera?" And he was talking about his interview process, and he said something along the lines of, people would rather reveal than conceal. And so his tactic was sometimes he would not say anything. Like he would bring, a person into a chair, sit them down, and then he would just kick back and wait. And when I was younger, I tried a little bit of that out, but as I mature, I think I feel more like that is a tactic. Like it may be effective, but it doesn't really feel fair in the sense to just like ice someone out and wait for it to melt. So I try to, give them the same that I'm asking of them.
Yeah, it seems manipulative,
Yeah,
right? Like using the awkwardness of silence to get people to
just
like
start
open up about
laughing.
themselves, and I guarantee like after that they're probably not feeling too good
Right.
about what they said. Like they probably feel used. And to see the more genuine approach with what you're doing, I hope more directors and interviewers, just anyone really, utilizes that. That'd be super cool to see. Like you're in an interview, and your interviewer wants you to ask them questions first.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
you referenced, the Dove Project, and I still keep in touch with some of the people from that film. We had a very, in the context of how a commercial shoot normally is, we had a very intimate process there. That typically would have been something that was almost pre-scripted, and it's a 2-day shoot, and so you're having to pre-plan what your moments are gonna be. I'm gonna film you doing this, this, and this, and these are the story beats that I need to hit, and I was in a place at the time where I was able to sell that agency on, like, "Hey, for the same amount of money that you're going to invest into a 2-day shoot with a crew of 20 people, give me 2 or 3 people and let me have 10 days." We had 3 different subjects. Let me spend 3 days, just me and a sound person, and we had a camera assistant that was, usually not even in the same room with us. We kinda kept him out of the process in some ways, um, to have a more intimate experience. So I was just in their house for, 3 or 4 days for 10 or 12 hours, and, gradually that camera starts to disappear. And that's we were able to get something a lot more authentic that way.
How how are you able to convince Dove to go in for a smaller crew in a longer shoot?
I don't know, I wish I had the secret the secret answer for that one because it's a sell that personally I think makes so much sense. Hey, why don't we and I mean, this is really what I'm trying to do on essentially every job now. I would say since about 2017. I had a few at bats kind of doing the bigger commercial director thing where I was sitting in one of the big high back chairs and there's an AD with a megaphone, and I didn't know any of the crew. There's dozens and dozens of crew people that I'd never met and I'll never see again, and it felt so alien to me, and I was just continually yearning how to go back, not go forward, but how to go back to the magic that I had gotten closest to probably around your age, that right towards the tail end of college when you're just going out with a couple of friends. In my era, that was with a 5D or a 7D, and, maybe you're trying to film some guy running and you're hanging out of the back of a minivan, doing that, and I started to trace, like, the DNA on my work, and almost anything I think I've ever made that's been worthwhile was probably under 7 people total, sometimes down as low as 3 to 5, and more now, that number is maybe 1, sometimes 2. I do a lot of work now where it's literally just me. I'm running the sound, I'm bringing the cameras, I'm running the cameras, I'm interacting with them, um, and it's a balancing act because the more the more you reduce the technical aspects of the shoot, you're gaining sort of emotional freedom in a sense. But then there's that balancing point of like, well, have I given up too much artistry or control to still get, a product that's beautiful or cinematic in some ways? I actually just yesterday, I think I was watching an interview with John Bragle of he used to have a company called Variable that was very influential when I was coming up, and we had kind of been in the same circles for years, but he similarly seems like he went on a journey where he achieved conventional success as a commercial director, and in his case, even more success than I ever did, and then kinda crashed out and withdrew from the industry, and I think has rebuilt seems to have rebuilt himself in a very healthy, grounded way where now he's re-entering the film space, but with sort of a new mindset, and he just recently, DP'd a feature that won South by Southwest or something like that with, Jay Duplass of, like, the Duplass brothers or Duplass, I don't know how you say their last name, but, um, he the interview was on Luke Forsyth's channel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He has a great YouTube channel.
You said Luke
Yeah,
Forsyth.
LucForsyth maybe. Um, Great documentary YouTube channel, a lot of practical advice from, like, a working cinematographer, but he was interviewing John, and he was asking John about their decision to shoot this feature film on an FX6 and a kit lens, where this was a real movie. They could have easily gotten an Alexa 35 or any of the conventional toys, and John was saying it was essentially a battle with his ego, but one of the things he realized was that he hated heavy cameras. And I don't think he meant that just in a physical sense. He meant from the aspect of like the more weight kind of gets introduced to a shoot. I mean, even if you're the operator, when you've got that big old doggy up on your shoulder, and then you have to have a camera assistant taking it off and putting it back on, it creates a mental strain that I think pulls you out of the moment. And so, maybe on the other end of the spectrum, you're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna get an FX3 with the little flip out screen, and I'm gonna be right up in there, and I can be in the action and be a part of it." And then there's, maybe a sweet spot somewhere in there where the balance is right and you feel or I feel free and able to connect with, um, whatever it is I'm doing.
Definitely. You were referencing earlier your success in commercial filmmaking when you're in New York. What did it feel like when you were having like a lot of projects come in? How did it affect you creatively, emotionally? physically?
That's a good question. Um, these are realizations that I think I've been able to make after the fact. If I were able to realize some of this in the moment, maybe things would have been different, but ultimately I'm very grateful for this path. Um, I would say that success found me or I found success or however whichever way that goes, it happened relatively quickly. I think by the time I was 24 or 25, I was starting to find a groove. And also I'm gonna caveat this by saying success is relative. Like in the grand scheme of the commercial industry, um, I achieved some minor success and I think was for a few years kind of a player in the game. Like people knew my name. I was getting briefs in all the time, but I don't think I knew how to handle that. And I mentioned earlier that I think a big aspect of working locally that's matured me is like having to really connect with the brand or the client or the agency and understand what they're actually trying to achieve and realizing that it's not my show. It's not for me to go in there and hit my dance moves and just take a dump all over whatever it is, because those agency creatives, um, what younger people don't realize a lot of times is they've been with that brand or that campaign sometimes for months, if not years. And there are so many decisions and battles that have been made before they ever knew who I was. Um, so I try to look at that now more as a partnership. But going back to your question, as far as how that affected me, I think I was so I can be kind of hard on myself. I don't know if I was really like this or not, but now I perceive how I was as so career oriented and burned too bright and flamed out too quick because I didn't know how to maturely field that success. And I think I wasn't giving myself the space in life to be creative. And I think that that's part of what soured me on the more traditional um, commercial industry was the process of treatments and agency calls and email chains and all of that stuff. Where in the work I do locally now, most of the time I'm just picking up the phone and we're having a 5-minute phone call and then I'm showing up and I'm shooting. There's not treatments, there's not boards, there's it's a lot more improvisational. And I I was also in the time in a pretty negative relationship, like romantically. And so I think those things were just kind of intertwined. Um, I was with a company at the time who I still love, and I think they're one of the best, um, small production companies out there. Do you know Voyager?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so I was with them for the first, 2 years. They started, I believe in Boston or, somewhere abouts where you are, and Andrew and Charles and David, they came over to New York. This was around 2015. I was starting to kind of get my legs as a director, and we were about the same age, we met each other at the right time. They were looking to bring on their first, rostered director, and sorry, my fill light went away. And we did some amazing work together for about, 2 years, and, the bulk of what you may be familiar with of my work because the majority of the work I've done over the last few years hasn't even made its way online yet. I I feel like I've been so overwhelmed or inundated just kind of getting up and running that I website updates, marketing, all that type of thing, I haven't done that stuff in years, so, um, I think it just made me very physically and mentally ill. I felt quite depressed during that period. I was not keeping really any sort of healthy lifestyle, whether that was out for late nights or sleeping in and then going out the door and getting a big old fat bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich for breakfast. Just like,
What did you get it on though?
uh,
What
everything,
did you get it on?
everything bagel, toasted. I just wasn't healthy. I mean, that's kind of the long and short of it. And for me, it basically took the form of a total reset because in those years with Voyager, where I found pretty quick success, then comes the courting from the bigger companies. Then comes the union companies emailing Smuggler, some such, uh, Rattling Stick, which is who I ended up signing with. And these were kind of the big leagues of the day. You know, this is where young directors hope to get to. And I had a lot of people kind of whispering in my ear at that time, um, "Hey, this is your shot. You gotta go and take this shot. You gotta leave Voyager behind, and you gotta go pursue the big leagues." And I did that for about a year and a half, with a company called Rattling Stick, who still operates, I think, but they've been through a lot of changes. And, I referenced earlier that I did a few kind of traditional union commercial jobs and was just so disengaged from them and consequentially not able to make work that I was really proud of in any way. Like, I got the biggest paychecks I had ever made, but I was no longer connecting to the work, and I felt like wasn't able to really make good work. And some of that's because I didn't have the maturity to kind of understand how to navigate that world. There's people that do figure out how to make their vision happen even at the biggest scale, which is, I mean, such a political and emotional battle to push a strong vision through as a director when it comes to massive projects. And so I ended up parting ways with Rattling Stick probably around 2017 or 2018. I don't really remember. Um, and kind of withdrew almost entirely from the commercial world. And um, I think it was a form of self immolation that I was doing consciously or unconsciously. I can't really say, but I needed to let that success burn off me. And on the commercial side, I ended up meeting Daniel Nevada, who is the executive producer of Bright Young Things, who is still who I'm with in terms of commercial representation. But he was just such an understanding guy. Like, I think I've never really been someone that's brought them massive projects or financial success, but I think we just connect as people. So he's always been kind of open to having me on the roster. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's been non-exclusive. So I've been free to pursue other projects. I've been free to kind of cultivate this local thing. I still work with other production companies. Um, but they're a really great company. Then on the personal side, um, yeah, I just kind of needed to let all of that burn off. And I think it was around it was April 2019. Um, I, well, actually, before I tell this, when I was trying to reimagine what was going to make me happy, I've always been a very artistic person, more of an artist than I am kind of a I'm not really cut out for the commercial industry in some sense. My personality doesn't lend itself to that, but always drawing, always painting when I was younger. And I imagined that like one day I wanted to wake up in my apartment and there was no TV, there was no stalking Vimeo for references. There wasn't this like ravenous appetite to always be figuring out the trend or the next thing. that all there would be a notepad, a camera, and then, like, maybe a little watercolor set. And my options would be kind of reduced to those 3 things, and I could wake up with nothing really on my mind, and I would have a choice, "Which thing do you wanna pick up today?" And I started to make that happen for myself in April 2019. I bought a Blackmagic Pocket 4K, it was new at the time, and that was like this, that was kind of the first, like, back to childhood creativity feeling I'd had in a long time. The freedom to pick up the simple little camera and go out on the streets of New York and shoot whatever I wanted to shoot or film my life was, really refreshing. And I think I was craving, the deeper you go into the industry, it becomes this technical behemoth, to the point where I felt disconnected from the process of making itself. Like, I wanted a camera that was almost as intuitive as a pencil, that I could just kinda pick it up and move it and use it, and that's what the Pocket 4K was for me. It was just this simple little clown shoe, with a nice big screen, and I started almost a daily practice of going out on the streets of New York and filming things, sometimes filming my life, and this is probably the most significant few years of my life artistically, and it's also the part of my life that, like, people know the least about because you can't some of these are kind of littered on my Vimeo, there was never any real organization to it, but I would kind of create these daily sketch films where it was like, I'm gonna go out and shoot, I'm gonna come home and edit, and then before I go to bed, I'm gonna export something. It doesn't matter if it's amazing, it doesn't matter if it's cinematic, it doesn't matter if it's 15 seconds or 5 minutes. And the amount that over a period of I did that for about 5 years. Basically all
5 and daily.
it wasn't daily. I think at one point I averaged it out, and I think I averaged about 130, shooting days per year. So it'd be, once every couple or 3 days. Um, but you imagine doing that for, um, 5 years, and
You're getting those reps in.
I ended up with something, several hundred little mini films, and I didn't know where this was going or why I was doing it. I wasn't it wasn't generating me career opportunities. Like, people talk about passion projects, I think in a way that's kind of cynical, where your passion projects are really just kind of spec projects to get you commercial work in some sense, and that's fine, you need to do those also, but these were about as uncommercial as it got. But by about year 2 or 3 of doing that, um, I stopped looking at the individual export, and then I kind of looked at that overall body of work, and every one of these films would just start with a day of the week and the date, Tuesday, May 19th, 2019. And so and my throat is getting scratchy. Hang on. I think somewhere around year 2 or 3, I just put them all out on a timeline in Premiere, and I watched them all the way through this just linear progression through these daily films over the years, and I was like, "Holy smokes, man, like, that's my life. That is my life." It's these little impressions of what each of these days was like, and it gave me so much more back than I had gotten from, you know, forget commercials, even music videos or short films that I had done, which were very rewarding, and they were personal in a sense, but, like, this was as personal as it could get, and I ended up sort of giving this collection or body of work an unofficial name that I called the LIFESTREAM, and, The only time I've ever even screened it publicly was, about 2 or 3 days before I moved out in New York. I held a private screening and, held these poor about an audience of about 30 people.
How long was the live stream?
So this was in 2022, so at that time, it was only 3 years old, and it was about 4.5 hours. Um, I ended up once I did that screening and it was, like, a very rough cut. I mean, like, my apartment was packed up, and I'm, like, frantically editing on a laptop just trying to get something to export to take to the screening, and, I'm sure a few people fell asleep during the screening, but I also asked people to kind of, like, leave written feedback, not in terms of, like, technical feedback, but just, like, what the hell do you think about this? Like, I don't know of another project that's really like this. How is it making you feel? Um, and that feedback was such a cherished thing, and this eventually became a film. A friend of ours accidentally threw away the feedback after she collected it that night, and we realized it the next day, and so we started a garbage hunt around New York City trying to track down the garbage from the venue, and
Any like dead bodies while you're trying to like find the
no, we found some I'll send you the film if you want because it's really fun. We ended up, we went to the venue, and we intercepted the trash as it was being loaded onto a garbage truck, and I don't know if it's in there, but we're taking it. So we took 2 or 3 garbage bags back to my apartment, drug them upstairs. I rip open a garbage bag. There's pizza boxes and food and just some nasty stuff, and we ended up finding this pile of scraps, shredded, and what happened was the venue owner thought it was trash and had just ripped it all up and thrown it in the trash. And then we went through the tedious process of taping all of these bits of feedback together with Scotch tape. And so I still have somewhere in the studio a folder of all of these pages of feedback taped back together. And that I'm getting like chills as I'm talking about it. That became like the perfect encapsulation of this project, like of all these little fragments of life just torn and thrown in the trash. And then someone has to take the time to put them back together and give them some sense of meaning. Um,
like a giant artistic puzzle?
yeah, and someday in the future, I hope that there is another live stream screening, and that feedback will always be part of it. That's almost like the exhibit, the existence of this work. And then
Well, what was the feedback like? What were people saying?
I think the best piece of feedback I got was, some people wrote pages of stuff, and then there was one that just said felt like life, and that uh,
Simple.
yeah, and I feel like I'm gonna get emotional talking about it, but that's part of why I talk about what I talk about now is because you could be 80 years old. I'm gonna dog. This isn't about any one filmmaker specifically, but let's say you're Steven Spielberg and you're on your deathbed, and you've made work that hundreds of millions of people have enjoyed, and it's made a cultural impact and entertained people. But it wasn't I know that the DNA of the filmmaker always goes into the film in some ways, and so I should probably leave a name out of this because it's not about any one film. It's just the idea, like, I want the memories that I have on my deathbed to be my memories, not these pieces of fiction that for some reason I spent like, it's such a strange concept to me that we may spend, like, millions of dollars to make something that kind of approximates how we feel, and we put it in a story form so that it's more accessible to others, but, um, this is something I talked about in one of these entries was like, what if you had just if I had no idea what filmmaking was and the concept didn't exist and the structure of Hollywood and the things that we know about filmmaking weren't already in my head and an alien just teleported into my life and said, "This is a camera. You can do anything you wanna do with it." I don't think that my first instinct would be like, "Let me figure out how to make a commercial project and get 200 people and production companies and millions of dollars." I would be like, "I'm gonna film my friends. I'm gonna film my mom before she's gone."
It reminds me, you talking about the live stream. So I like to make music, and unlike you, I like struggle with being like truly vulnerable with my friends. But you know, whenever I make music, I can be vulnerable because it's like true, like it's truly me whenever I'm writing.
Yeah.
And I like to write during like emotional moments to truly capture that feeling. Um, but I remember like I shared it, like I had a like album viewing party and all my friends came over, and I'm so nervous, just like you. I'm like making final tweaks and edits and getting ready to export it. And I played it for my friends, and I'm just like thinking, you know what? I'm making all my friends come and watch my album viewing party because they have to. But the end result was like people felt um, touched, they felt heard, and again, like I was doing this just because there's a microphone, and it felt like me being me, you know, not recording for billions of dollars, or you know, getting a whole production crew involved. And yeah, I really, Henry, I really felt what you're speaking to, and hopefully it inspires other people to, you know, just pick up the camera and do what they feel like doing, and not be, you know, bounded by, like as we were saying, passion projects, um, and whatnot. Yeah. How was it like similar to vlogging when you were doing
Uh, n not really. Um, and I realize that sometimes when I talk about it, someone's like, "Oh, so you mean vlogging?" And I'm like, "Kind of." But it it was more about it was more elusive than that because it was mostly observations. Like I said, a lot of what I did was filming the streets of New York or, something that wasn't me. Occasionally, I would show up and maybe I'm talking to a friend um, but I don't think it was ever like me talking to a camera in that sense.
so like something that you experienced raw naturally minus your reaction, just showing more of what you saw.
Yeah, like life is kind of the noticing and the observations. And when I was editing the version that I was gonna show at the screening, like I said, the films were already edited for the most part. Sometimes I was chopping off bits to make, 2 films flow into one another, but because there was such a frantic rush for the screening, and I realized that, very little of this has any context, I was just, like, live typing over the films, like, adding, text at the bottom of them. It was quite sparse, it wasn't there all the time, but it would give a viewer just enough insight into something I was thinking about paired with that image, and then it kind of took on a third higher meaning.
Yeah, I really love your entire journey, kind of catching fire fast. And I mean, I don't know, like you were saying burning out, maybe just reorienting yourself, and I guess to reorient yourself, you got to touch the sun for a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, if you were to go back in time, you know, you just graduated college, what would you have done differently?
Hmm.
Or would you have done anything differently too? Because you are where you're at because of the actions you took, and it seems like you're in a pretty good place right now.
Yeah, I do feel in a pretty awesome place. Life is very real right now, and I know some of what we were talking about in the beginning before we were recording was sort of the context of where I am now. Like, I'm sitting here in a home office in a house that I own. My pregnant wife is somewhere out there doing something. I've got a 1.5-year-old asleep on the other side of this wall. I'm working in my community, and I still have the access to go back into the commercial world. And because of this area and the cost of living, um, I've been able to build up, a real functioning amount of gear and studio to do the work that I do. Um, and that just feels really awesome. It is a grind. Like, fatherhood's about the most kind of real thing, not about them. It's by far the most real kind of gritty reality that I've ever done, and it's so amazing. Last night we had our 3-year wedding anniversary, and this is all stuff that I didn't really think or dream about when I was 22. So I don't think I could have done something different, or if I had done something differently, I may not be where I am now. I mean, of course, there are always things I would have done differently as far as specific actions or choices in the moment. I look back at things from when I was 22, 23, 24, 25, and I'm like, "Oh, you were such a little shit." Like,
Yeah.
that ambition, which is part of what got me to where I was also, um, something that I think was kind of harmful to the whole picture of who I was. So getting back more to who I was when I was in high school or in elementary school, when I was here in Tuscaloosa, you know, um, I did all this driving just to kinda come right back around to where I started, and I think that's a pretty cool journey, and that's part of why I really wanted to come on here and talk about this, is because, like, I hope to give filmmakers a window into some alternative, and it's not to tell people to abandon their careers or to alienate yourself from your industry or to even stop pursuing success in that industry. But I know a lot of people, especially as they get into their later 20s, and especially if they didn't grow up in like a big city, if they're from a place like Alabama or North Carolina, they want to have a house, they want to have a family, and they want to also be creative and kind of engage in that. And so I I'm now looking forward to putting myself out there more and kind of showing people that is, that's a path that exists. You can sort of straddle the world of working in your area. You can tap back into that bigger world, um, and things will be okay.
And you went to school for film, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, not really. I went to school here at Alabama, um, and what we had at the time was essentially sort of like a news broadcast program, and it was not significant for the most part. There were probably 2 aspects that I'd consider really significant about that education. Was 1, I did have one really, really great documentary professor, and, he was, I think, the only professor that really talked to us, like, as adults and as filmmakers and kind of challenged us. And then the other aspect that was worthwhile was there were a handful of people in that program that were kind of bound together by way of we were passionate about wanting to make films. That opportunity didn't really exist in the program, so we were like, "Okay, we'll just borrow the cameras and then go out and kind of make our stuff on the side." And that small group within a very large program, they've gone on to do, really significant things. Like, my friend Marcus Tortorisi, who is another director, I don't know if you know him, but, um, he's had a really great commercial career. He's who I moved to New York with. My friend Carly Palmer, who's in LA, she produces Netflix documentaries and all this amazing documentary work. Um, Many of those other friends have kind of gone on to stay within the industry, and we still are close, so that was significant.
One thing you've been referencing is simplicity, right? Like not going for that like giant camera
Mhm.
and sticking with that what like that the like an FX6. Um having a smaller crew. And I read about it in your portfolio on your website. It's like simple, impactful messages. Can you talk to me a bit about the power of simplicity in film?
Sure. Um, I have an older sister. I have 3 siblings. I have an older sister, an older brother, and then a younger brother, and we're all very close, but my she's my oldest sibling. She's an amazing artist, and, she has a fashion line that she designs. She has her own business, and but she's always been, just, like, very wise beyond her years, and I remember she was enough years ahead of me that we weren't super close per se when I was in, like, middle school or high school. She was, graduating and moving on to college, but I remember I used to love yearbooks, like, the process of looking at a yearbook used to be so, like, exciting to me, and I remember looking at her senior year yearbook where everybody has the quote, um, and I remember her quote, like, it just burrowed its way into my brain, and it's always stuck with me. It's attributed to Da Vinci. Who knows if he said it or someone, but the quote was, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication," and I don't think that's been something that I had consciously internalized or said, "I'm gonna make simple work." Um, I think a lot of the reason that I've gravitated towards simple work or simple films. Um, some of it will come down to just, like, practical things that, like, I've almost always been working with, like, very, very low budgets. Like, even the work that you've seen on the websites that's attributed to bigger brands and stuff, I mean, some of that was, like, so low budget, you wouldn't believe it. And then more and more as I'm doing all roles of the process, I'm directing, shooting, editing, running the sound, all of that stuff, I have to think in terms of simplicity. And then another kind of offshoot of that same idea is that, like, some of it's just been like, "I don't wanna do that shit." Like, that maximalist aesthetic that I mean, in particular right now, I think the trends of the commercial industry have been trending more and more maximalist, like, the amount of VFX packs and there is so much texture and film burn, everything has all this goo in it now. And it's been that way for a while. I don't mean that like that just started, but I see the work that younger filmmakers are doing now. And I think part of it is that they have the passion and the energy to collect 600 reference frames to do their Huggies commercial or something. And I'm just kind of like, I don't want to do that shit. Like let's put it on sticks and let's film a really long take because I'm gonna have to edit this anyway, and I don't want 8,000 shots, or I don't know how to do that stuff in the edit. So we're gonna end up with a product that's very simple. So I think I became somewhat known for that aesthetic that I think people thought was more of an intentional thing, and it it had a bit more to do with sort of resources and just like where my passions lie. That I don't wanna live that way. I don't wanna be up 2 AM scraping frame set. Um, and I don't collect any references. I used to do that when I was younger, and in some ways, I think that maybe that can hurt me sometimes on commercial jobs now, but, like, I'm sort of limited to what I can come up with in my head, which if you've got a good noggin, that can be infinite, but, I want fewer of other people's ideas in my head when I'm trying to create something.
Yeah, and a lot of people in the commercial filmmaking world, they're influenced by a lot of others' ideas, and then that impacts their own internal dialogue, their own creative process, and it's swayed and shaped into making like others happy rather than truly being themselves. I think that's why you're hired, a big reason as to why you're hired as a director, for your creative vision and for you being yourself. And that's something, especially in this day and age, that's really hard because you see everyone online, you have all these influences, all this feedback, and you're trying to make yourself different to appease others at the end of the day. Um,
Kind of different, but the same. Like, everyone wants to be on trend, but to have found that one extra little shot that nobody had done yet, and then add that into the mix, and then suddenly you're like the new it boy. Uh,
yeah, for like a week, and then there's another
and
hit
trust
play.
me, it'll go. You'll be out as soon as you're in.
It's uh, it's a really scary cycle, and you know, going back to what you're talking about with the gentleman talking about his mental health, that definitely plagues. I think it's a chronic pandemic right now,
Mhm.
that a lot of people are facing, just like who they are, like being themselves.
Yeah. Some years ago, and this is kind of a muddled analogy, and it's sort of drawn from biblical stuff, but, we don't need to get into that. But this guy was talking about, um, the flood and Noah's Ark, and he was talking about the idea of we're in the next great flood, we just don't know it, and the flood is information, the flood is just stuff. The flood is that, like, we have so many ideas and names and references and images and all of that stuff bouncing around in our head at all times to the point where that inner voice gets harder and harder to I mean, it's drowned out. That's where the flood analogy was, that like you the real you is likely just being drowned out by this flood of things coming at you from all sides that we're not really we perceive. Like, we're all kind of hip to the conversation of like, oh, social media, it's great. But that, like, think about it in kind of a more tangible terms. Like, if I close my eyes and say nothing, what's happening in my head? And when I'm in a good mental space, I either hear nothing or occasionally I'll hear my true voice. If I'm not in a good mental space, it's just like, I'm hearing the 80 reels I just watched on Instagram. I'm hearing all the YouTube videos I just watched, and it's just something to watch out for.
Yeah, huge thing to watch out for. I mean, it's adding to your brain fog. It's impeding your ability to critically think. And again, like what I was saying, it's taking away from your ability to be yourself. And I kind of notice whenever I detox off this stuff, my body has this like physical reaction to it. Like when when you first close your eyes to hear that. So I meditate a lot, right? And I usually do like a 30-minute meditation each time. And the first 15 minutes, Henry, is like my mind trying to like process everything. And as you're saying, those 80 reels and all those past events that happened, because people also aren't giving their minds the freedom to process everything and to digest everything. So it's causing this like constant mental cycle, like a lot of anguish
Uh-huh.
and suffering that people are going through. And you know, by distancing yourself, you're able to kind of clear your brain out, get all those toxins out, to A, not hear anything, or B, hear your real voice.
Yeah, and, I'll give an example or just, like, an idea that I thought about a lot years ago. Like, I went through sort of a like you're saying, a conscious detox period, um, 2019, 2020, where it was like, I'm not watching anything, I'm not keeping up with I didn't know nothing about nothing.
Kardashians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I started to think about things like, love and romance or death and violence, and I started just, like, thinking about the idea of, like, okay, I mean, I've I've had very little experiences with, like, real death or something like that, but I have lots of ideas about it, and the reason is because I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of and thousands of depictions, and ideas about death through media, or I've had, even the way people behave in relationships, sometimes I think we don't realize that, like, we've been absorbing ideas about it for decades without really consciously processing that, like, those weren't my experiences. Those were depictions that I was handed. And then so when we go to make a movie, it's a depiction of a depiction of a depiction that we've seen. And I think that may be part of why film generally seems to be kind of losing its fizzle with people, is fizzling out a little bit, is because we're filmmakers that were raised on filmmakers that were raised on filmmakers, versus a lot of the work that we look back on as more pivotal. I mean, it depends on what your reference points are, but, like, there was a time where you may not have had that many reference points for that film that you wanted to go out and make, and you were poking around in the dark a little bit more. And then I think, a lot of the icons of current film, whether it's like a Scorsese or a Spielberg or somebody like that, they were they grew up on cinema. They were referencing the original pioneers of the 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. I'm not a film buff, but, like, and now we're referencing Spielberg and Scorsese, so we're generations handed down of, like, referencing the reference that referenced the reference.
Yeah, and I mean, filmmaking, it's still fairly new, like maybe a little over 100 years old.
Mhm,
So, like I could see the shift into kind of like copying. And it's okay to, I think it's okay to copy because like creativity to me it's a recycled thing,
mhm.
but it feels like the new copy lacks complete. It lacks a lot of originality.
When I first started doing more of this kind of live stream stuff on my own that I was talking about, I think people were kinda looking at me like I was, crazy, and or just that I was doing something that was kind of a waste of time. But, I see the way that people in the industry kind of look down their nose towards that, like, YouTube level of stuff. The idea of somebody just kinda going out with a camera and doing their thing. Like, "Oh, you didn't shoot it on film, you didn't, oh, you didn't do the book light, you didn't," whatever. Um, and to me, it is valuable to think about icons, important things from the past. Let's say you're really into Stanley Kubrick. Let's say that's rather than trying to make a film that looks like Stanley Kubrick's films, I think if Stanley Kubrick were around now, he would be interested in the forefront of, like, these tools becoming more accessible, or more like, I don't think that Kubrick would be doing now what he was doing then, or whoever it is, whoever you wanna sub in there. I think that, like, we're all kind of shaped in an environmental time, and we're making work that reflects that era or that time or those conditions. And I think right now we're in this really interesting era where we do have these amazing accessible tools to kind of go out and create in a new way, but we're still pretty fixated on trying to create the surface of what influenced us, if that makes sense.
What are you trying to say more? So I get what you're saying, the influence, but what do you think about we're trying to recreate what worked and what made money?
Um, I mean, the studios are trying to recreate what made money, so they'll recycle the same stories or IPs over and over again. But I think from the passionate filmmakers who are very well intentioned, they're looking and they're like, "Oh, all of my favorite films were shot on film. That means I need to shoot on film." But it's like, well, it's not to say you can't shoot on film, and I've shot on film plenty of times, and it's a great experience. But um, it's the same thing with, like, At one point, I rediscovered my old, like, iPhone 4, and I was just blown away by the photos from that camera because it was so in the moment, like, that's what the tool was of the time, versus, like, there have been other times where, like, let's say I'm shooting on, I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna shoot on, expired 35 millimeter film or something," and it's like, I'm trying to be retro to me sometimes is only gonna date the work, like, use the tools that are the markers of your time in some way. I'm not saying you have to do that, but, like, we'll look back on iPhone photos the same way we look back on Super 8 film, so I don't feel as drawn towards shooting on Super 8 film because that's not my era, you know, we're the iPhone era, like, we'll use these tools now and we'll look back and we'll say, "Wow, they had such a special quality." Um,
Yeah,
not
yeah, it's not like it's maybe romanticizing the past a bit too much and not being willing to accept what we have and advancing forward.
I'm at my best when I'm not trying so hard to get to this place. I don't mean that you don't try. I was trying the character is built in trying, but I'm saying when you're aiming so hard, um, I think we rob ourselves of the joy of probably what brought us there in the first place. And I think that we're living in a really beautiful time. Um, and things are interesting, and let's try to appreciate what's unique and interesting about this moment rather than dreaming about some moment in the future or fondly looking back at some moment in the past.
Henry, I appreciate how vulnerable you were and also the amount of thought that you put into each of my questions.
Yeah.
Can't thank you enough. I very much look forward to seeing how you progress as a father and how you progress as a filmmaker.
Yeah, and if it I appreciate it, and the last thing I wanna say kind of on the podcast side of things is, like, I know that y'all have brought on, some guests with, like, big names and, like, y'all are I don't know how old the rest of the company is, but you're a young guy, and, like, I want you and y'all to know that, like, because I'm in this position where I'm working locally now, I see Votary, like, y'all are my peers now. I was surfing around on y'all's website and looking at the stuff y'all are doing, and, you know, I draw inspiration from that now. Like, I don't really care about looking at what insert huge director name or DP name is doing. I like the people that are kind of out there creating, like, in no way demeaning at all, but, like, sort of regular work that's, like, for, brands that's, like, interested in what they're trying to achieve, that approaches it, like, tastefully, and, like I said earlier, is not trying to do the nay all over it. Like, I can tell that y'all are interested in telling the right story for each project, and, um, so just keep doing it.